I'll call this meeting of the Plan Commission to order. Mr. Clerk, can I have a roll call whenever you get a chance?
Mr. Buttry.
Here.
Oh, one moment. We've lost a pen. Thank you. Miss Bindum. Mr. Fell.
Here.
Mr. Fitch.
Here.
Mr. Hopkins. Mr. Otto.
Here.
Mr. Storr.
Here.
Mr. Trail.
Here.
Mr. Ackerson.
Here.
We do have a quorum. I'd like to, before we get going here, introduce our newest Plan Commissioner, Mr. Barry Ackerson, soon to be retiring Associate Dean of Social Work at the university. So welcome. And are there any changes to the agenda? No changes. Approval of the minutes. We have two sets of minutes. We have the June 11th regular meeting and the June 25th rescheduled meeting.
I'll move we approve minutes.
Moved by Mr. Fell, seconded by Mr. Trail. Are there any changes to the minutes? Hearing none, we will vote on this by a voice vote. All in favor of approving both sets of minutes, please say aye. Aye. Those opposed? The minutes are approved. Let the record reflect Mr. Hopkins is here. We don't have any communications, I don't think. We don't have any continued public hearings. We don't have any old business. We do have a new public hearing. Plan Case 2254 T15, application by the zoning administrator to amend the zoning ordinance, minor changes to Article 2, definitions, Article 5, use regulations, Article 6, development regulations, Article 7, conditional and special uses, Article 8, parking and access, Article 11, administration, enforcement, amendments, and fees, Article 12, historic preservation, and Article 13, special development provisions. Mr. Garcia.
So this is a request by the zoning administrator for a multi-part amendment to the zoning ordinance, which really consists of a variety of mostly minor changes. The last time we had an omnibus zoning ordinance amendment was 2013, and since then we've had 3 text amendments to the ordinance that have been approved, and those will require incorporation into a republished zoning ordinance. Now, when we republish the zoning ordinance, we have the opportunity to make other minor changes to the ordinance in the form of this type of omnibus text amendment. So, just as a reminder, those 3 cases that were passed and that will be incorporated into the new zoning ordinance were the medical cannabis use regulations, the electronic message boards, and the CRE zoning district, and the gaming hall use regulations. So now I'll just run through pretty briefly all of the proposed text changes. You can follow along in your memos, and then after I present these, if you have further discussion or questions about specific changes, then we can go through those. Also, in the appendix that you have, you can see all of the actual changes to the text that we're proposing. So first off, in Article 2 definitions, we're adding a handful of definitions. Some of these were terms that were already used in the zoning ordinance, but we noticed that they weren't in the definitions if you look them up, so we decided to add those to clean it up. Some new uses. Microbrewery is a proposed new principal use, which microbreweries are just small-scale brewing facilities that can include tasting rooms and small retail operations. Banquet facilities are something that have been allowed in the city as are catering services. These are uses that have been allowed in Urbana but have not yet been defined, so we decided to add those. Then there were a couple of smaller changes where we just referred certain common words like deli and self-storage facility to other definitions in the ordinance. We also are proposing to revise Figure 1, the floor area ratio, just to make it more clear. Moving on to Article 5, use regulations. We wanted to update Section 512, which is our home occupation section, and that just had some improper references to Section 5-13 instead of Section 5-12. There's also a minor change to change the phrase immediate family to household, or to members of the household. Currently, we state that people involved in home occupations have to be immediate family, and we're changing that to household. In the table of uses, we're proposing to add banquet facility as permitted in the higher business districts, the CCD, MOR, and IN1 districts, and then with a conditional use in the B1 and B2 districts. We're proposing to add catering service to B2 and the higher business districts, CCD, MOR, IN1, and with a conditional use in B1. Then there were a couple, I'd call them things that weren't so logical in our use table in terms of, so contractor shop and showroom and also lawn care and landscaping service were uses that were allowed in the B1 district but weren't allowed in B2. So we're proposing to allow those in B2, which is a more permissive district than B1. Also, duplex dwellings were allowed in some of the lower residential uses, but not in the R7 district. So we're proposing to change that. In addition to defining microbrewery, we're proposing to add it to the use table in the higher business districts and in the industrial districts, and also with a special use permit in the B2 district. We'd be amending the table to allow vocational trade or business school as a use permitted in the CRE district, which makes sense since the E in that district stands for education. And then we would be amending references in Table 5.1. In Article 6, development regulations, we would add floor area ratio regulations that are currently in Article 2 that don't belong there because they're regulatory, so we'd be moving them to their proper place. We'd be editing illustrations in Section 6.5b, and we would also add planting beds as allowable in required yards. We have allowed this in the past, but the zoning ordinance is currently silent on whether they're allowed or not, and we are proposing to allow them. Table 6-3, development regulations by district. We're proposing to reduce the yard requirements in the B2 zoning district to match what is allowed in the B1 district. They're two very similar districts, so we feel that those yards should be the same. We're proposing to add a footnote to Table 6-3 to add a reference that is just needed to guide people to a caveat for certain districts that you can see in your memo. In Article 7, conditional and special uses, we found an artifact. Home for the aged was still in that section, even though we replaced it in a previous omnibus in terms of I think in a couple of other sections, but we missed it that time around, so we're replacing it with the current term assisted living facility. In Table 8-7, parking requirements by use, there were a couple entries that were in there twice, so we're just striking those out. We'd also be adding gaming hall parking requirements, since we've now allowed gaming halls as a use. We'd be adding parking requirements, and these would be similar to other uses like general food sales and service or general retail trade uses. It's also a very minor amendment to Figure 8-2. In Article 11, for notification requirements, we're proposing to add procedures for continued hearings or meetings. I think currently we don't have any procedures for that, and so we've had to sort of a couple times we've had to open public hearings with one commission member here, and then say that a case is continued, and then close it, and then continue it for the next time. So this would really keep from wasting a commissioner's time and also staff time on a 2-minute meeting. In Article 12, the Historic Preservation Ordinance, we would be making an amendment to paragraph 12-5C1D to indicate that the notable work of a master builder, designer, architect, or artist can be a collaborative effort. Currently, I think that's the spirit of that criteria for designation as a historic landmark, but it's not. The zoning ordinance is not clear on that, so we wanted to make this clear, and we brought this to the Historic Preservation Commission. They thought that was a good idea to clarify that as well. Finally, Article 13, Special Development Provisions. We would just add 2 references to a table, which are pretty minor, and then just make some minor editorial changes. I missed the supplemental staff memo. So going back to Article 9, I'm glad I wrote the reminder in my notes twice, so I caught it the second time. So there was a change that was proposed for Article 9 for signs and OASS regulations, which would amend the electronic sign illumination table to reflect current and pending regulations for digital signs. So those you can see on the back page of that supplement to the memo. So with this case, the Plan Commission can choose to forward the amendment in whole or with specific changes onto the City Council. If the Plan Commission feels that certain changes require additional analysis or discussion, we can have a separate plan case for those, and we can discuss those at a later meeting. So the options really in this case are to forward this case to the City Council with a recommendation for approval as presented, to forward it to the Council with a recommendation for approval with specified changes, or to forward this case to City Council with a recommendation for denial. Staff recommends that the Plan Commission recommend approval to the City Council in this case. That concludes my report, and I can take any questions. We can discuss any of these things in further.
Thank you, Mr. Garcia. Any questions for Mr. Garcia? Mr. Otto? Yeah.
Under Article 5, the change of the phrase immediate family to household.
Mr. Otto, I'm sorry. Could you lean into the microphone?
Yes.
Thank you.
Can you help me understand, in my mind, immediate family would be people with some sort of biological or marital connection, and household can be up to 4 unrelated adults living in the same household. So by changing that, currently if, say, someone had a tax service and they had an adult child who came in and worked at that business, they would be part of the immediate family but not part of the household. Am I understanding that correctly?
I suppose so, yeah.
I mean, what are we trying to do with changing the
I think we're
language?
trying to make it less restrictive and understand that not everybody living in a house are going to be immediate family members. So this is more permissive. So, if say I lived with my girlfriend and we had a home-based business, then we could both, then it would be allowed under the zoning ordinance, which currently with this language, I guess that wouldn't be allowed because we're not immediate family. I'll also point out that immediate family is not defined anywhere, but that's just.
I'm wondering whether you might want to have an or, if you're wanting to be more expansive.
Yeah, I can see, because with your example, I could see how that would make sense.
If I
Ms.
may,
Pearson? Yeah.
thank you. It's been the trend with zoning ordinances to eliminate the very antiquated term of family and move to the more socially acceptable term household to reflect the relationships, as Mr. Garcia had pointed out, as well as many others that I'm not about to get into today. But it's not necessarily just about the home occupations, but it's to eliminate that term family in general and to recognize the different sorts of households that that occupy homes.
Do you intend to, for example, not let an adult child who's not a member of the household aid in a family business? Which seems, if you're using the term household and they're not resident there, it seems like they would not be allowed. Is that the intention?
That is not the intention, no.
I'll just go right down the line. Mr. Story, you had?
Yeah, I was looking at a section at the floor area, and I noticed that there was a change from 2.5 feet to 2 feet 6 inches, and I was puzzled why that change was needed.
Yeah, so that probably could have been explained a little further in the memo. We're just trying to amend our illustrations in that section so that they are consistent. So there are other illustrations in that section that follow the format where they would say, 3 feet 6 inches as opposed to 3.5 feet. But then you look further down, and then you've got this one that says 2.5 feet. We thought as staff it made more sense to go with 2 feet 6 inches. We thought that would be I don't know. It seemed like a better choice to us. I will point out that I realized earlier that we need to adjust in the actual illustration. It still says 2.5 feet max. So we would need to change that as well.
Mr. Atkinson?
I'm new, so I'm just trying to catch up.
Fire away.
On the electric signs with the changes that were made, so it looks like some of the larger signs are not. So would you just explain what the changes were here? And
Well,
is this something already suggested by the city council or by the planning department?
Yeah, there's another case that is being considered by the city council that would regulate digital billboards and digital signs, and that passed through the plan commission probably 6-7 months ago. So this is designed to reflect the changes that are pending in that other case.
Okay.
I will point out though that even without that case, we already noticed that we don't even allow signs, I think, over, I'm not sure, we wouldn't allow a 650 square foot electronic sign before even. So we noticed that there would need to be some changes there anyway, but these reflect the pending.
That was part of what I was trying to figure. Is
Yeah.
it that we don't actually allow signs bigger than this?
Yeah, currently I'm not sure exactly off the top of my head what the maximum size for an electronic sign would be, but 650 square feet I think is a bit larger than we allow. But this will bring our zoning ordinance up to date if that other case goes through.
Any further questions? Mr. Fell?
I'll try not to make this sound a little self-serving, but in the B2 district, I believe that's a district where we have the regulation that there's an additional setback for buildings over 25 feet high.
That is correct.
Correct.
That's one of the zones, yes.
That remains in place?
It remains in place, but there have been several staff discussions on how to fix that, because we do think, especially in the B2 district, it's a bit onerous.
Okay.
Further questions? Mr. Trail?
I have a quick, it actually doesn't really directly have anything to do with the amendment. I was just looking at the parking requirements table that's being amended. Does this apply to all zones, or is this
Yeah, the parking requirements, well, all zones except for B4. The central business district does not have any off-street parking requirements.
Still seems like a lot of parking for a minimum, but hey.
Further questions? I do have a question. Actually, kind of two questions, but I'll start with the first question.
All right.
Microbreweries. Are microbreweries allowed in the liquor code? I meant to look it up,
Were
but I didn't.
They are. Neither of us are well versed on which kind of liquor
License,
provision.
sure,
Right,
but
but yes, in the state, yes.
They are allowed. And the second question is that can you sell food at a microbrewery? Because specifically you say you can have a tasting room and retail space to sell beer-related products. I know of some microbreweries that are restaurants, and be great for Urbana to have some establishments like that, I think.
I can weigh in a little bit, not a lot, but I believe there are different licenses depending on what you do. So certain microbreweries are only allowed to serve the beer or alcohol that they brew on site. They can't serve any other alcohol or food. I think it depends on the license
What kind of
they
license
get.
you have.
You're
yeah.
right. I think it depends
so like
on your
Distill
license.
in Champaign where they brew it off-site, I think.
They brew it on site.
They do it actually
Right.
there?
But something like that, we would consider a restaurant first.
With
There-
the secondary use of,
Correct.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, right. If your primary, I don't know what the threshold is, but if your primary
how much is
income
sales, yeah.
is from food, then your alcohol license comes under a different venue.
okay, that helps me understand this. I just didn't want us to preclude a microbrewery from selling food is where I was driving.
Right.
I think in
Mr.
most
Chair?
places, one of the differences between brew pub and microbrewery is the amount of beer you're allowed to produce in a year. There's a lot of places, I don't know about here, microbrewery would also allow off-site sales and things like that, which brew pub would not. I mean, so I'm not sure actually microbrewery would allow a brew pub. I don't know what the state law is, but in most places that I've lived, they're considered different things and usually different statutes apply.
Yeah. Well, if all that's handled in the liquor code, then it's, it's not for the zoning ordinance, obviously. But I just wanted to clarify that we wouldn't be precluding a use that could be beneficial. So, further questions? Nope. All right, thank you, Mr. Garcia.
Thank you.
Well, any discussion? Anything, any concerns? Danny kind of raised one, Mr. Otto, on some specific language. Mr. Hopkins?
Banquet halls in the MOR. Restaurants and private lodges, which strike me as the most similar current uses in the MOR, are conditional uses. Is the intent that banquet halls be a conditional use? It's not obvious to me that in the MOR, which is essentially Elm Street and Green Street from Lincoln to Race, that banquet halls fit the intent of the MOR. And I'm assuming that may be why restaurants and lodges are conditional uses.
All right.
So I would suggest removing it, but at least going conditional.
All right. Do you want to formally propose one or the other?
I don't know how we're going to handle amendments, whether we're going to, how we're going to deal with this.
Well,
But there are
let's-
others. I
if
was
there's
thinking it might
specific-
make sense to,
I mean, I think we can discuss it some more and then get down to specific languages.
right, that's what I'm thinking,
Yeah.
that maybe figure out how much we're going to do and then.
Sure.
Lou,
Mr. Otto?
would your comment also apply to catering service as a conditional use in the MOR?
Less clear to me, but maybe. The point, I think of a catering service as being something that serves people elsewhere. And whereas banquet hall implies parking, crowds, alcohol, peak use, evening use, a bunch of things that don't seem consistent with the MOR to me. Catering service is
I'm just thinking,
closer to a home occupation in its character, I guess.
some of them are quite substantial, and you could have substantial deliveries, fans from range hoods, da-da-da-da. If you're living right next to it, I mean, we are talking about Green Street. It could also
Right.
turn a place
Right.
into kind of an
Yeah.
industrial.
I haven't looked at other aspects of the MOR regulations like setbacks and floor area ratios and all sorts of other things to
Well,
know.
I think we have a, correct me if I'm wrong, in the MOR district, regardless of your lot size, you have a maximum square footage you can apply to your FAR,
Yeah, I mean,
which would,
Yeah, that's
which
correct.
would almost constitute a banquet hall as almost a non-starter in the MOR. And if there is one, it's going to be pretty small.
Yeah, that's what I was wondering about, and I haven't gotten to those yet.
I can look up those.
Okay, but Mr. Childs, did you have a point while Mr. Garcia's?
I was just going to make a suggestion that if we think we're going to have people have multiple points that we might want to have an amendment to this on, we might want to do them separately so they could be voted separately,
Okay.
rather than ganging them together somehow into some omnibus amendment to the omnibus.
That's a good suggestion. We'll do that.
There's lots of footnotes, so sorry about the delay in us checking that out.
Well, a couple of other things that I'll just throw out that I was thinking about, and I don't know that I'm terribly worried about them, but I was a little worried about the vocational thing or school in the CRE. I know CRE has the word education in it, and that's one of the permitted uses. Am I correct that our other schools, the public schools are generally, what are they zoned? I forgot to bring my zoning ordinance.
I was just looking at the map today. I think they're CRE.
They may be. That's what I
Yeah.
was trying to, that's what I'm asking.
A spot check, yes, the public schools are in the CRE zone.
CRE, great, okay. Well, then we're being consistent, and that's what I was, I assume that's why you're making the change, but just to make sure.
So it's
I apologize, I'm not finding where the MOR floor area is tucked away in here.
that's for parking.
Six 3D.
Found it?
I just found that footnote.
Yeah, right.
The hazards of having to look at it almost every day.
Yeah, right. Human memory does it again.
I was looking in 6.3, I was looking in 6.4, the floor area. the 6.3 lot area and width.
Can we add that to the omnibus to fix that reference?
Oh, the reference is correct. Okay. So it says, in the MOR district, the maximum area of a zoning lot shall be 8,500 square feet for the purpose of calculating the floor area ratio and open space ratio. The objective of this section is to keep new structures compatible with the scale and density of existing development in the MOR district by preventing the use of one large parcel for the purpose of erecting a single large structure. I can read the rest of it, but it's...
Okay, and the floor area ratio is... Yeah.
5,000 square foot building.
I mean, if it's a single-story building, that could be a 50 by 100-foot bank.
Do we want to bring this discussion into the public domain? Yeah.
We're trying to figure out what
How big could it be?
means.
Yeah, I know.
So it would appear that you could have a 5,000 square foot banquet hall.
It's a pretty big building.
50
Yeah.
by 100
Yeah.
is probably more
Some of the
people
apartment
than
buildings there are
I
pretty
want.
big. I don't
Well,
know.
the
Yeah.
apartment buildings there are actually not in the MOR, if you look at the zoning. map.
Really?
Um,
I thought that's why we made the amendment.
I think it's a little trickier than that. If you look at the MOR,
Oh,
there are,
they're-
those are R4s or
I
R5s.
see. Yeah. I did
So-
not know that.
So the ones that are already there, or were already there, were not
I did not know that.
zoned. I didn't know it until about 20 minutes ago either.
So just to clarify, with a maximum square footage of 8,500 to calculate the FAR, it would be 5,950 square feet is what the building could be.
Yeah.
So
All right. Thank you for the clarification. So it looks like we've got two issues of possible clarification, or two or three, depending on how you look at it. And so we've got banquet halls in the MOR, catering business in the MOR, and we've got household versus some other language. Does anybody want to take the lead on one of those, Mr. Hopkins?
A comment on the household immediate family. In the home occupation section, without a permit, with the proposed language, it would be limited to members of the household. With a permit, it allows for one non-member of the household to be involved in the business. And it seems to me that already addresses then the question being raised. To the extent of one person.
Mm-hmm.
And for the idea of a home occupation, I think that's reasonable. So I think the way it gets reworded works.
Any other thoughts on that, Mr. Otto?
I think
Can you live with the language that's proposed?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. What do we want to do about banquet halls, first of all?
how are we going to do this? Are we going to propose amendments before we've got a motion on
We
the
would
floor? or
make a
should we put it-
motion. No, we would make a motion and then,
So if we're ready to do that, we need to make a motion, I guess. It implies to me that we think we're ready to
I
make
agree
some
with
minor amendments and do this tonight, not.
sounds like it.
Okay.
If that's the only issue.
So, I move that we send plan case 2254 T15 to the City Council with a recommendation of approval. And I make that motion with the expectation that there may be amendments, but
Yeah.
you've got to get a motion on the floor
Move-
first.
Motion by Mr. Hopkins,
Second.
seconded by Mr. Otto. Further discussion or amendments?
If I understand it, the idea of catering not be included in the MOR would be an addition to this ordinance that removes something that was not even discussed in the proposal. Is that, am I correct in that, or am I missing something here?
I think that's true.
In other words, the proposal was to add banquet halls
Correct.
to the MOR.
And catering facilities or catering services as well.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
So they were
they're-
both, okay.
That's a
all
new.
right, that's
they're
what I
both
wasn't-
new uses. Yeah.
that's
Yeah,
new
I'd like to
uses.
discuss
Okay.
lowering the parking minimums, but I don't think that's really germane to the particular proposal in front of us.
It seems odd, but I guess if nobody else could do it, I'll do it. So I would propose an amendment that would remove from the current motion the addition of banquet halls and catering facilities to the MOR.
Do we still want to make it a conditional use or just remove it altogether?
I am proposing removing it.
There's an amendment proposed on the table.
Strong feelings. Defeat it and
Well,
try another one. That's fine with me.
If somebody's going to second it.
I think I understand the concern about banquet halls. I'm not quite sure I understand the
Let's
concern
get
about
the amendment
catering.
out there.
Oh, I don't have a second yet.
That's right.
Yeah,
That's right.
oh, he doesn't have a second, sorry.
Seconded by Mr. Storr. Motion by Mr. Hopkins, seconded by Mr. Storr.
Sorry.
Make your action.
You have to forgive me, I'm still getting used to
No, that's all
procedure.
right. The chair probably messed up.
Yeah. I'm just not, I understand the concern about banquet. I'm not quite sure if I understand the concern about catering.
well, I think the concern, at least in my mind, is that both of these uses are potentially intrusive to their neighbors, and part of the intent of this district is it's maybe not primarily, but heavily residential. And so if you have either a catering business or a banquet facility next to somebody's house, that could be problematic.
With the idea that we're not talking about mom and pop catering, you're
Right.
talking about something
Yeah.
with vans and that sort of thing.
We're talking about catering, so it's whoever wants to.
Not necessarily
you
as a home occupation,
Yeah.
I think.
Yeah, I mean, Aramark would qualify as catering. I mean,
Yeah.
that's most of their business.
Mr. Otto?
Lou, would you consider, on those phrases where it has at banquet facility be permitted by right, and it has all of this in MOR, move the MOR over to conditional use on both the banquet and the catering, because there could be a possibility, I'm trying to think on Green Street, say for example, the Unitarian Church covered by the MOR. Let's say, I
think
mean,
so.
it's a thriving church, but for sake of discussion, if it ceased to function as a church. I mean, so we've got the Baptist church down here that's gonna become some sort of a public presentation space. And people seem fine with that because it's on the corner, it's not between residential houses. So if you have conditional use, then the public has the right to come comment on it and say this is not compatible.
Actually, a conditional use.
Zoning Board of Appeals.
So there's still a public comment for zoning board of appeals, okay, yeah.
So if it's put in conditional use, then it would be contingent upon the specific lot and whether people in the neighborhood think it would be appropriate, rather than removing it completely.
You're talking about catering or banquet
Both.
facilities or both? Both.
So if we're, in the summary, where it has banquet
Yeah.
facility be treated strike MOR there and move it over B1, B2 MOR.
Yeah, so here on page, well, it's not, it's page, section B12, table B1, table of uses, you're asking Lou if he'd be willing to accept an amendment to his amendment to,
Yeah.
to
To
change
revise the
the
amendment.
P's to C's.
I'm concerned
Yeah.
that not every lot there is conducive to some of these uses, but there might be somebody who has a specific.
Okay, I think that my reaction is, the Baptist church is actually zone B4. Okay, it's not in the MOR.
I'm just using that as an example.
well,
of repurposing a building.
I realize. And working, I grant you, from memory, let's see. I think yeah, I mean, the only buildings that could possibly be that would be the two churches, Presbyterian Church and Unitarian Church, without
That
without
purpose that we
modifications
identified.
that would break the ordinance anyway. And trying to remember, the Unitarian Church fronts on Green Street or on? I'm just trying to see what's in the MOR.
How about Lindy House? That might be.
Lindley House could be used for catering.
Yeah.
They
I-
have
I-
occasional meals there, banquets.
At Lily House.
Depends on the scale that you would qualify as a banquet, yeah.
I don't have strong feelings about it. My general inclination is, I think it's a bad use for the intent of the MOR. And I was trying to look at the intent statement for the MOR, which is going
Yeah,
to be.
I'd be curious for you to read, if it's short, read that, if you can find it. I just kind of had, every time we start talking about Green Street, especially with the Tiger grants and all this talk about, oh, well, we're going to improve transit along there and all that, like, you know, kind of an area that probably should be upscaling some. I realize there's probably some resistance at some point, but, you know, in the long run, if Urbana is going to get denser, which is at least in our stated plans, what is some area somewhere is going to have to get denser. I mean, so I don't know.
I think maybe this is about the intensity of the use rather than necessarily density, if I understand the concerns. But I hear what you're saying.
I mean, and most of it, when you're talking about floor area ratio and all of that, I mean, so these are specifically talking about businesses, but in
Mhm.
general, it's about density.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
Um,
Mr. Atkinson?
I'm still trying to sort it through, but the idea about moving it to, with a conditional use permit kind of makes sense to me in that it allows for a level of review that we're not having to decide today what fits, but it says it can be at least be considered. And if there's a lot of opposition to it, given the specific location, it wouldn't happen anyway, right?
It might happen, but at least the public is heard.
Yeah.
Right, that's true, yeah.
Mr. Hopkins?
Yeah, I mean, we've got a motion that's been seconded, so.
We've got a motion
I
that's
guess
been
we could-
seconded. Yep.
To do it, I think it sounds like we should defeat this motion and make another motion.
That sounds like a plan. Let's have a roll call on the amendment, which includes excluding both banquet facilities and catering services from the MR.
Mr. Buttry? Mr. Fell,
No.
Mr. Fitch,
No?
Mr. Hopkins,
Yes.
Mr. Otto. No. Mr. Storr.
No.
Mr. Trail.
And abstain.
Is that gonna make a whole lot of difference now?
No, it's,
Mr. Ackerson.
No.
all right, that motion's defeated. Do we have another amendment? Mr. Otto?
I move that banquet facilities and catering services be allowed with a conditional use permit in the MOR.
Moved by Mr. Otto. Seconded by Mr. Buttry. Any further discussion? Mr. Storr?
Yes. What, if you put in a banquet facility or a catering service, does that mean that they have to provide a certain amount of parking?
Yeah, they would have to comply with the zoning ordinance. Whatever parking is required of a business operating in the MOR. And we looked up the floor area ratio. I don't know if the parking is different in MOR than it is in,
Right?
yeah. I mean, the answer is yes. I don't know what the requirements are.
I'm just kind of wondering how large of a, I mean, if you have a banquet facility of any particular size, it's going to require a fair amount of parking that may not be available. And that kind of is kind of self-limiting.
True. I'm not sure what the requirements are.
So, I believe, so we do actually have catering service in our parking requirement table, but we just don't define that in the in the zoning ordinance yet. So for a catering service, it would be one space for every 400 square feet of floor area. For a banquet facility, I don't believe, yeah, it's not in here, so it would be called a restaurant or similar use. And that would be one for every 100 square feet of floor area, excluding outdoor seating areas.
So that's it.
So a 6,000 square foot banquet facility would require 60 parking spaces at a minimum,
That's correct.
right?
And you
Which
you
is-
probably wouldn't be able to get it on a lot down there, but
Yeah,
depending on
so
how
you-
you did it.
I think you figure, what, 300 square feet at least for a space? So you'd need an additional 1,800
No, 18,000.
square feet.
Yeah.
18,000?
So essentially, the parking
No.
requirement kind of mitigates the size
1,800.
of a building.
Unless
For
we
a bank,
lower the
yeah.
parking requirement.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's for
What,
another day.
60?
That's for another day. Any further discussion? Perceptive point, Mr. Storr. Further discussion?
So,
The Mr. Hopkins.
well, I'm trying to figure out the parking and whether in fact that would be permitted, because the typical lot there is 8,500 square foot, right? These are 85 by 100 foot lots. Which means you're gonna have 3 of those lots converted to parking in association with a building on another lot. Which, no. The conditional use permit may solve it, because it strikes me as totally infeasible to actually accomplish, and highly undesirable besides. But,
As soon as Mr. Trail,
I'm just kind of, so why did they decide that they needed to add banquet facilities specifically to this? Just because it appears elsewhere or
To the
something?
omnibus? So I know we've allowed banquet facilities before, and I think we're just trying to clean that up and make it a use of its own.
How were they allowed before? Just as a general business or?
I wasn't
Were there
around.
problems
I
with
wasn't
that
around when
process
those
that this is addressing?
when those cases went through, and I would defer to my planning manager, but she was around. She was not around either. So I'm not sure how those cases were processed. I assume they would have been treated similar to a restaurant, but that's
Okay.
just speculation, though. So
I
I'm
just,
not
my
sure.
is why these particular ones came up. And we're focused on only one of the districts. Maybe our amendment should be we want to remove it from certain zones as opposed to removing it entirely or making it conditional use.
We are removing it from specific, only the MOR.
That's the one that was,
That's what I thought.
that
we
was-
were doing.
as a permitted use.
Yeah, well,
This-
now it's.
Now it's a conditional use, yes. Mr. Otto?
I grant it seems unlikely, particularly for a banquet hall, that it'd be possible to do it here. But we don't lose anything by saying if someone has a creative way or some sort of specific design, maybe they want to do high-end dinners for no more than 16 people, at $200 each or something. They could do it. It would be a banquet. I mean, what are we losing to say conditional use? You've got to figure out how to make it work. Then you've got to tell the neighbors what you're going to do. Then you're going to have the zoning board of appeals approve it, and then the city council. So
Just ZBA, not city council on conditional use
okay.
permits.
Yeah.
but the potential is there, and it seems to narrow it from what it is here, where it's by right.
It does.
That's all I'm concerned about. If no one could ever figure out a way to do it, fine. If someone has an idea that they want to do it, meet all the conditions, it shouldn't be by right, is my concern. And that's my purpose with this.
Yeah. All right. Well, let's go ahead and have a roll call on the amendment.
Mr. Buttry. Yes. Mr. Fell.
Yes.
Mr. Fitch.
Yes?
Mr. Hopkins.
Yes.
Mr. Otto.
Yes.
Mr. Storr.
Yes.
Mr. Trail.
Yes.
Mr. Ackerson.
Yes.
The amendment passes. And now to the motion as amended.
Mr. Buttry.
Yes.
Mr. Fell.
Yes.
Mr. Fitch.
Yes?
Mr. Hopkins.
Yes.
Mr. Otto.
Yes.
Mr. Storr.
Yes.
Mr. Trail.
Yes.
Mr. Ackerson.
Yes.
That motion as amended is passed. And do we have an inclination of when this will go to the city council?
30th.
August 3rd.
30th.
August 3rd. Thanks for the good debate and discussion. We don't have any new business. We don't have an audience. We don't have a staff report. We don't have a, do we have a staff report? I'm sorry. We don't have a study session. Therefore, we are adjourned.